Okay, 3, 2, 1, action.
The 90s are back, baby. Zellers, Janko jeans, people treating stuffed animals like crypto, and of course the threat of Canada being torn apart like a pair of knockoff Janko jeans. But this time, it's Alberta threatening to leave the country. That's right, separation. It's not just for sad dads or Quebec anymore. And thanks to a fun new law passed by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, it's easier than ever to force a referendum and turn Alberta into its very own landlocked petro-state. And this new Alberta is gonna be awesome. Mass deportations, defunding First Nations, and so much oil and gas extraction that Alberta literally becomes the pollution capital of the world. It's all right here in this 50-page blueprint. I forgot the blueprint. Howdy. It's all right here in this 40-page blueprint from Alberta's largest separatist organization. And the best part, they already got Trump on board. It is about to get real. So for the sake of national unity, let's find out what these separatists really want and see if we can't come to some common ground as Canadians. Hi to my Aunt Darlene, Uncle Rocco, all my cousins, and everyone else in Alberta. I'm Aaron Hagen McKay, and welcome to the Goose. Today I come to you in the traditional dress of our people whenever a dorky Toronto man wants to appeal to Albertans, because we need to talk about Alberta separatism. Recent polls show only 20% of Albertans say they would definitely vote for Alberta separation, compared to over 50% who say they would definitely vote to stay, which sounds like a referendum is doomed to fail. Meanwhile, the separatist Alberta Republican Party can't even come second in an election. Also, Alberta is on treaty land, signed with the Crown of Canada, not Alberta, because here in Canada, law comes from a magic hat. So, is this issue being blown out of proportion? No. Dismiss Alberta separatism at your own peril, JJ McCullough. Sure, Alberta separatism has no distinct culture like Quebec, the Basque, or the Welsh. But those separatists in Alberta have one thing those losers never had. Oil money, baby! For example, this is the Free Alberta strategy, Alberta's Project 2025, designed to make separation easier in the future by creating Alberta versions of federal programs. It was written by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's former Chief of Staff Rob Anderson, along with University of Calgary professor Barry Cooper, and some guy named Derek. They want to secure self-determination for the people of Alberta within a reformed confederation, or if necessary, as an independent nation, because Alberta's treatment within Canada has become intolerable. That's why they want to offload the burden of Ottawa's tyrannical economic policies, like the federal carbon tax, the No New Pipelines Act trademark, and attempts by federal agencies to regulate our province's energy sector in any manner. And if it seems like they're weirdly obsessed with hitting climate policies like a political piñata, that may have something to do with the fact that their publisher is the Alberta Institute, a right-wing fossil fuel-funded think tank in the Atlas Network. Atlas as in Atlas Shrugged, the only book to create more unfuckable twerps than The Lord of the Rings. The Atlas Network has 11 organizations in Canada and over 500 worldwide, including the Heritage Foundation, publishers of America's Project 2025, called Project 2025, currently halfway through turning the US into a techno-feudal fascist dystopia, or as they call it, freedom. The Atlas Network is funded by fossil fuel interests like ExxonMobil and everyone's favorite half-alive villain duo, the Koch brothers. And oh boy, does their hatred for climate policy burn like the undying fire of 1,000 suns. And when you know it, the largest oil sands company in Canada is Imperial Oil, majority owned by ExxonMobil. And who refines the bulk of Canada's oil? Koch Industries. Alberta separatism is a US-backed psy-op for oil. That's it. That's why it's a big deal. Right now, social media is awash with disinformation and conspiracy theories, and honestly, some pretty dope AI slopaganda to manufacture consent for further American control over our resources.
He once gave Donald Trump a tour of his ranch. Now Alberta has a free trade deal and 3 new golf courses.
I paid 50 grand in taxes this year.
And what did Ottawa give you back?
A carbon tax and a lecture on pronouns.
He once left a barbecue early because someone brought Beyond Meat burgers.
They keep bringing in more people than our communities can manage. Crime is rising. It's not the Alberta I grew up in.
We're importing the problems of the third world.
He's never used someone's pronouns and plans to keep it that way.
We could lead the world in energy, innovation, and freedom if we had our own country.
He doesn't believe in man-made climate change. He believes in Chinooks, cold snaps, and common sense.
Alberta must become an independent nation. Independence or collapse. The choice is ours.
So is it working? I don't know. Where do you think all these American flags came from? Italy? But you may be wondering, why is this happening now? You may remember just days before Canada's 2025 election, Preston Manning, the Reform Party leader in the 90s, casually lobbed the grenade of Alberta separatism back into the national conversation with an op-ed in the Globe and Mail, warning that electing Mark Carney will bring back the specter of, get this, Alberta separatism. Oh, thanks for the warning there, Preston. You talk to your wife that way? Oh, sorry, hon. If you go on that business trip, we'll bring back the specter of me putting my grade A Alberta beef inside your sister again. Reform! No surprise, Preston Manning has his own Atlas Network think tank, the Canada Strong and Free Network. They hold a huge conference every year, putting a terrible strain on Grindr's servers. They even stream it on Rumble, because of course they do. And oh look, it's Imperial Oil and Coke Industries again. What a coincidence! Around that time, Alberta Premier Daniel Smith, with the subtlety usually reserved for cliche mob goons and bird memes, sent this list of demands that must be met by the next Prime Minister or else there'll be a national unity crisis. Almost all of the demands were straight from Big Oil's wish list. Then Mark Carney won, and Alberta passed Bill 54 days later, which made it way easier to force a referendum by lowering the signature threshold and increasing the time to gather them. Now you just need 10% of the people who voted in the previous provincial election to sign your Citizens Initiative petition, and baby, you got a referendum stew going. But one detail of Bill 54 went underreported. It allowed corporate donations during elections and increased the amount third-party advertisers can spend. Canada's version of super PACs. Because nothing says improving democracy like flooding elections with dark money. Third-party advertisers like Rebel News routinely host Alberta separatists while also selling I Stand With Trump mugs. Like, this couldn't be any more obvious. Like, why not just sell autographed copies of his letter to Epstein? So who's working on the Alberta separation petition? The Alberta Prosperity Project, or APP. They're Alberta's largest separatist organization, and they say they have over 200,000 people who have already committed to signing their separation petition once it drops. But for people who talk a big game about sovereignty and becoming independent, the Alberta Prosperity Project sure likes to talk about becoming a US state. Like, imagine if Quebec separatists were like this. We have a distinct society and must become independent. But also maybe we join up with Vermont because Bernie has raised Tabernacle. No, it doesn't work that way. Recently, the APP launched their plan for what happens after they win a referendum. But before we dive into that, I need to educate my fellow non-Albertans on why separation might seem like a good idea. Albertans have legitimate grievances against Ottawa, some of which are baked into the fabric of the federal government. But let's be real, the number of people who want to separate because of seats on the Supreme Court or representation in the Senate is exactly 0. This is entirely about he who controls the spice, except with giant trucks instead of sandworms.
He who controls the spice controls the universe.
The original insult from Ottawa started in the 1980s under Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, pictured here posing for the father-son issue of Bilingual Vampire. He introduced the National Energy Program, or NEP, an attempt to make Canada energy independent, increase Canadian ownership in the oil sector, and provide people with cheap fuel in the wake of multiple oil crises in the 1970s. But all of that was kind of at odds with oil companies maximizing profits. This was seen as federal overreach and was highly disruptive to Alberta's oil industry. Eventually, the NEP was abandoned, but many Albertans permanently put the Trudeaus in their burn book for trying to make gas cheap, and then 40 years later, for making gas more expensive. Later, free trade agreements like NAFTA geared much of Canada's economy into raw materials for the US, making us super dependent on them while crowding out other industries. Canada is being used as a resource colony, and Alberta is no exception. Oil and gas, mining and quarrying is 25% of Alberta's economy, on par with petrostates like Iran. Practically all of Alberta's oil goes to America. 30% of Alberta's economy is dependent on the US, so it makes sense they'd elect a premier who was a lobbyist for oil and gas companies and can cozy up to Trump. Side note, check out Kevin O'Leary over here looking like Danny DeVito and twins. Honestly, this explains so much. Probably the biggest bone of contention is equalization payments, a federal wealth redistribution system that ensures a consistent level of government services across provinces. Alberta is the largest contributor, due in no small part to its oil and gas industry. Quebec, on the other hand, takes way more in equalization payments, more than all other provinces combined. So for some, it feels like Alberta keeps writing big checks to Ottawa's favorite spoiled child while getting nothing in return. Which is not exactly true. During COVID, with the collapse of oil markets, Alberta received by far the most in emergency benefits per capita. They even got $1 billion to clean up abandoned oil wells, keeping oil and gas workers employed. But still, the argument goes, Alberta would be better off without equalization. So you can see why resentment might build as the rest of Canada acts like, money please!
Give me money. Money me. Money now. Me a money needing a lot now.
And then there's the narrative that the federal government is always getting in Alberta's way, which again is just code for getting in the way of the oil and gas industry. They point to the cancellation of the Northern Gateway pipeline, the consumer carbon tax, the electric vehicle mandate, the tanker ban off the North BC coast, making us all eat bugs for every single meal, and worst of all, the government's environmental assessment law, often called the No More Pipelines Act. A bold choice, considering the government just finished a pipeline to the BC coast that cost taxpayers $34 billion, which we covered in a previous video. And now they're kicking the tires on yet more pipelines, including another one to the BC coast with Alberta as the proponent. And if we can't get that pipeline done...
This is a Canada project. And this is a test of whether Canada works as a country. Because if we can't build with the collaboration of the federal government and between provinces, if it's everybody gets to get their products going to market except Alberta, that's not a country.
Exactly. If we can't force a pipeline through a neighboring province, then what the is even the point of Canada? It's high time someone thought about those poor multinational petroleum companies who just made record profits, are producing more than ever, and are cutting jobs like crazy thanks to automation. I say they've been pushed around by big local indigenous community for too long. In reality, oil sands production has more than doubled over the last quarter century thanks to billions of dollars you, the taxpayer, gave to these mega corporations because something, invisible hand, free market, etc. That's how Canada became the 4th largest petrostate in the world, and how our governments became addicted to those sweet royalties in every barrel. We're producing so much that we've basically hit capacity on how much we can move, until inevitably the price of oil drops and the industry goes from boom to bust. That's why they want more infrastructure now to lock in more production later and expand their bottom line in the future. At the same time, Canada has international commitments to lower our heat-trapping pollution, which we're already super failing at. Something has to give here. But this goes deeper to people's sense of identity. The primary goal of this psy-op is to convince Albertans to identify with the fossil fuel industry specifically and the US more broadly. And I get it. Oil is part of Alberta's culture. That's why you named your hockey teams after the cause and consequence of climate change. But soulless companies are not part of our culture. They just leverage our culture for profit and gain. A bit like how Tim Hortons is part of our culture, but really owned by the same company that owns Burger King and Popeyes, and a big percentage of that is owned by a Brazilian private equity firm. Call me crazy, but I think Alberta is much more than an oil sands extraction operation, especially when oil sands production is 70% foreign owned. From the grasslands, to the lakes, to the mountains, to the farms, to the giant egg, and the giant mall with the submarines I never got to ride in because my dad said it was too expensive, and now they're gone forever, the real Alberta contains multitudes. Right now, a lot of folks in Alberta are struggling. I get why it's compelling to hear things suck for you because the rest of Canada sucks. Think about how much better you'd be if we made the rules and kept all the money instead of funding those woke, ungrateful idiots. Well, enter the Alberta Prosperity Project with their bold vision of, what if more oil? The Alberta Prosperity Project, or APP, is a nonpartisan nonprofit that uses their Envato Element stock account to inspire and unify all Albertans on the importance, necessity, and benefits of Alberta sovereignty. According to their website, Alberta sovereignty means freedom from persecution politically, economically, and culturally from federal control, as well as from the UK, Europe, China, the World Economic Forum, and the World Health Organization. I wonder why that list doesn't include the USA. I tried to find out where they get their money, and the best I could do was this section on their website called "Who is Financing Us? Why isn't this transparent?" where they basically say it's private, so f*** off. So I don't know, maybe they're not getting their money from fossil fuel companies like Preston Manning and Daniel Smith's former chief of staff. Maybe they're getting it from an increasingly accelerationist David Suzuki. Now, the most vocal spokesperson for the APP is their lawyer, a guy named Jeff Rath, who was given several interviews in a cowboy hat. I mean, come on, dude. Who's gonna take you seriously if you're wearing a cowboy hat? What?
We're in a situation now where, let's imagine that Alberta is a completely battered spouse who's been punched in the face repeatedly by an abusive husband, right? And for sake of argument, let's call that abusive husband, Mark Carney. Okay, so let's just imagine that, Carney is the abusive spouse. All he has to offer Albertans is a little box of chocolates. Oh, I'll give you an energy corridor. Oh, I'll do this for you. I might do that for you. Oh, no, but we're not going to kill the anti-pipeline bill. Oh, no, we're not going to change the specifications on rail tankers so that you can move, oil by train to Texas. Oh, no, we're not going to get rid of the carbon emission tax. Oh, no, we can never, ever give up on the idea that we can actually limit Alberta oil production by putting in production caps.
Now, am I the only one that thinks it's deeply weird to compare Alberta, the country's richest province per capita, to a battered wife suffering at the hands of a guy who dances like this to Down with Webster? Earlier this year, the APP released The Value of Freedom, their vision of a post-referendum Alberta, and in my humble opinion, this document is bananas. If I had to boil it down to one sentence, it would be, oil solves everything. And luckily, oil never runs out. It all rests on tripling oil production and doubling gas production. Then they can finally achieve their utopian vision of a free Alberta as one of the lowest taxed and regulated nations in the world, rivaling jurisdictions similar to Dubai. Because when you hear the word freedom, you immediately think of a playground for billionaires full of useless aggrandizing mega projects built by literal slaves. Literal slaves? So let's pretend for a moment that Alberta becomes an independent country. First, you're probably wondering, what are they going to use for money? Well, according to the plan, they're going to temporarily adopt the US dollar. Temporarily. Don't worry, this is not a Trojan horse to make Alberta a permanent part of the MAGA empire. They definitely want to be independent forever, which is why Alberta will create their own currency, the Alberta Dollar, which is going to be backed by oil, because of course it is, because oil solves everything, but also gold, and of course a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. Now I know what you're thinking, why not fart coin, or hot to a girl coin, or Trump's meme coin that allows him to take bribes with impunity? Well, because if they choose the cryptocurrency that consumes as much energy as the entire country of Poland, that just increases the value of their oil and gas, see? This is some 4D chess we're playing here. Next, remember those First Nations treaties I told you about? Well, the APP says they're going to stop the $1.8 billion in payments from the federal and provincial governments to the 48 First Nations and 8 Métis settlements in Alberta. Why? Because they want to shift the approach from government dependency to self-determination by allowing them to control their lands in perpetuity. Does that mean they're going to give all of the land back? No, the sovereign independent country of Alberta also claims Alberta's crown land. However, they say they will give a small fraction of that crown land back in addition to subsurface mineral rights. So, now that your First Nation has no financial security, have you considered letting oil companies frack your land for money? What a fair and completely equal bargaining position to be in. They estimate First Nations will be able to bring in between $1 and $2 billion annually, so potentially way less than the $1.8 billion they're already getting now. But hey, freedom! The APP says they have the utmost respect for the sovereign and Indigenous people of Alberta and is in no way intended to replace or diminish treaty rights. They also go on to propose some ideas they think might redress generations of harm from the Canadian government. If they really take sovereignty seriously, Indigenous communities will be able to say no to new fossil fuel infrastructure on their land, an answer the Canadian government currently has a hard time accepting. So I guess the only way to find out if this isn't another bait and switch from a different settler colonial government is to vote for Alberta independence. I'm sure you can trust that an independent Alberta will repair the historic injustices of Canada's racist past/present while doubling down on extraction. Now, let's take a look at their plan to conduct mass deportations of immigrants. To get the right people moving to their newly independent country, the Alberta Prosperity Project has an immigration point system that prefers natural-born Canadians over naturalized citizens. And they also want to purge a bunch of immigrants let in during the extremely unsatisfactory policies implemented by Canada since 2015, with mass deportations that prioritize post-2015 arrivals. Most of the people who came to Canada around that time are from India. So is this just code for we're kicking out all the brown people Justin brought in to work at Singh Hortons? No, that would be racist. They're just preferencing like-minded Canadian brothers and sisters because they understand Canada and its winters and have at least a fighting chance of being able to drive acceptably on snow and ice. Apparently, this is entirely to do with driving. So maybe also deport assholes who park their trucks like this? Does having a driver's license get you immigration points? No. But coincidentally, the Alberta government just put citizenship markers on their driver's licenses. So is this a real step towards ICE-style mass deportations? Or just some bull to get Maple MAGA wet? You decide. While they admit their deportation plan may disrupt certain sectors like agriculture and construction, and mass removals could alienate communities, and automatic deportation may violate human rights, that's not stopping them from trying to make it happen. But perhaps my favorite detail about this whole point system thing is that you get 10 points for having no serious illness, but that doesn't count if you've had experimental mRNA injections. So bonus points if you're an anti-vaxxer. It's all part of their new ad campaign. Come to Alberta and be free to get measles, mumps, rubella, meningitis, and who knows, maybe even polio, smallpox, and Ebola. Just give it time. But apparently, becoming the disease capital of the world isn't the only record they're going for. For those seeing and breathing this summer, your eyes and lungs probably confirm to you that climate change is a problem. And scientifically speaking, Alberta going all in on oil and gas would be nothing short of a f***ing catastrophe and an insult to life itself. In fact, Alberta would literally become the pollution capital of the world. Remember, the plan to turn the province of Alberta into the People's Petropia of Tarsandistan rests on tripling oil production and doubling gas production over the next 20 years. And that means more pipelines through the US, because we sure as shit ain't building those in Canada if they leave. The APP estimates infrastructure investments at $300 billion, which is a lot to put on Afterpay. But thanks to energy transitions, demand for oil will probably peak within 5 to 10 years. So oversupply might cause the price of oil to collapse. Bye-bye pipe dreams. You could reasonably present this plan on Dragon's Den and get an
I'm out.
I'm out. And I'm out.
I'm out.
I can't make any money here, so I'm out.
Kevin was a bully. He kept going on about having sex and that wasn't what I wanted to come in for.
But let's pretend they're able to triple oil and double gas production. How bad is that for the environment? First, there's the tailings ponds, an industry euphemism for giant toxic sludge lakes, left over from using river water to blast bitumen off sand. The APP says relaxing environmental regulations may increase healthcare and environmental remediation costs, e.g. tailing pond cleanup, estimated at $130 billion. And that's just tailings ponds today. Now imagine how much it would cost if you triple production over the next 20 years. Steam cleaning millions of tons of sand takes energy, which means burning an unbelievable amount of fossil fuels. Depending on the operation, it could be like burning 1 barrel of oil to get 3 barrels of oil, which isn't exactly great for the climate. Canada's oil and gas industry pumped out around 200 million tons of heat-trapping carbon pollution in 2023. To put that into perspective, the rest of Canada was about 494 million tons. That's right, more than a quarter is just getting fossil fuels out of the ground. It's our biggest polluting sector, and most of that is in Alberta. So what do we mean when I say that an independent Alberta would be the pollution capital of the world? Well, first, I need to get a bit technical, so bear with me for a moment. You might have heard stats like the average Canadian produces 17 tons of CO2 a year, and you were probably told that that was your carbon footprint. But that's a goddamn lie from BP to make you feel guilty for driving to work while they spill 3 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of America. Yeah, I said it. That number is actually emissions per capita, total emissions divided by the population. While your carbon footprint is a scam, emissions per capita is useful for comparing pollution intensity between countries. Small petrostates like Qatar have enormous emissions per capita at roughly 40 tons of CO2 per person, more than double Canada's. According to Guinness, the highest per capita emissions in the world goes to Palau due to their tiny population and an economy that is mostly just moving doughy white folks around on yachts and private planes through their Pacific island paradise. They clock in at 59.8 tons of CO2 per person. So what would happen to Alberta's emissions if they tripled oil production and doubled gas production? I made a short video going through the math in detail, which you can check out afterwards, but spoiler alert, Alberta blows past Palau. Emissions per capita just from tripling oil and doubling gas extraction, and nothing else, would be $65.2 tons per person, so congratulations! But what about Alberta's emissions now? Well, somebody call Guinness, because Alberta's current emissions per capita are already 59.8 tons per person. Alberta becomes the pollution capital of the world on day one of independence. Luckily, the Alberta Prosperity Project has a plan for the environment, one that rejects the globalist carbon scam that wants to kill Alberta's planet-killing industry. They say an independent Alberta, free from the constraints of the existing climate agenda, could pursue a fulsome environmental strategy, one without the narrow focus on carbon. And then weirdly, they go on to list all of the ways Alberta could suck up carbon from the air by using nifty land management techniques, all of which they say could lock away 10 to 33 million tons of carbon per year. Now you may be wondering, are all of these unsourced estimates of carbon sequestration bullshit? Well, thankfully, you don't need to spend hours looking at studies to find out. Why? Because one, even their most optimistic estimates don't neutralize the damage they plan to do, and two, Alberta doesn't need to be independent to do any of these. They could do them all tomorrow. But do you think the Alberta beef industry is going to be happy switching from cheap feedlots to expensive multi-paddock rotational grazing? And even if they did, do you think Albertans are going to be happy to pay more for beef?
$79 for steak. Alberta needs to leave this country.
No! Why would the APP bother sequestering carbon when they just told you they don't give a shit about carbon? Putting all that aside, I get it's a tall order to get you to care about climate change when there's a literal fascist in the White House. But Trump's stated goal is energy dominance, and Alberta's oil and gas is part of that plan. This isn't complicated. It's very Settlers of Catan, and no one wants our f***ing sheep. So, how independent would an independent Alberta really be? Back in April, a delegation of the Alberta Prosperity Project went to Washington, D.C. to discuss Alberta separation with the Trump administration. One of them was the chairman of the APP, Dennis Modry, who spoke about it at an event hosted by Rebel News in June, where he said,
So there's a couple of things I'd like to share with you that I didn't already. One of them was our trip to Washington on April the 22nd, when Jeffrey Rath and I met with senior U.S. administrative officials, just a couple steps away from the president's home. When we walked into the conference room, the first comment, just as we were sitting down, was, we recognize and support Alberta becoming a sovereign nation. That was the first comment.
Countries don't really exist unless other countries say they exist. And if the US recognizes Alberta as an independent country after a successful referendum, that's pretty much that. Canada may have a process, but do we really expect the US to respect that? Modry went on to say they discussed exchanging every Albertan's Canadian dollar for one American dollar, and also floated a $500 million transition loan from the US government. So, what about Alberta becoming the 51st state? Well, according to Modry,
right now, Alberta 51 isn't on the table, but it could be at some point in the future. You're absolutely correct.
this story was originally reported by DSmog and then picked up by some right-wing YouTubers who jumped to the conclusion that Alberta was joining the US to be a full state, which pissed a lot of people off. The APP released this statement saying that the meeting was just introductory in nature and the US hasn't committed to anything. But then, in late September, the APP went back to DC for a second meeting and then confirmed the US has a firm support for Alberta sovereignty. So if the referendum to leave is successful, Alberta likely won't be a state, but it won't exactly be independent either. Before the Washington meetings, Jeff Rath was pretty clear. This isn't about independence. It's about submitting to US control.
You know, myself and a number of other Albertans have decided that enough is enough. We're tired of being governed by complete idiots, and we're at a unique point in history with the newly elected Trump administration to, send a delegation to Washington to discuss with the Trump administration their support for Alberta independence and to gauge their, the level of support in the Trump administration for an independent Alberta free of Canada, to gauge their support for Alberta either becoming a U.S. territory or a U.S. state. And I think the internal discussions are that the independent Republic of Alberta as a U.S. territory, like the British Virgin or the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam or Puerto Rico, is probably the best way to go.
Contrary to what most people who are trying to get Bad Bunny deported might think, Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. So don't let anyone tell you that this is about sovereignty or independence. This is about US domination. As Jeff Rath writes, who would you rather answer to, Ottawa or Washington? So to my fellow Canadians in Alberta, would you rather stay in Canada and work to resolve our issues within our admittedly imperfect democracy? Or would you rather leave, just so you can feed more oil to the decadent and decaying US empire as it embraces fascism and territorial expansion to prevent collapse for just one more day? I don't think that's the future most Albertans want, but I guess we're gonna find out. So, let's review. US oil-funded think tanks like Canada Strong and Free and the Alberta Institute have been actively encouraging separatism for years. A separation referendum in Alberta is now very likely thanks to a new law passed by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. The same law also increases dark money in Alberta politics. The Alberta Prosperity Project wants to cut all funding to First Nations, potentially putting many in a compromised bargaining position to have their lands exploited by oil and gas companies. Tripling oil production and doubling gas production would impose heavy costs on Alberta while making it by far the world's largest polluter per capita. The APP has already negotiated for the US to recognize Alberta after a successful referendum. Alberta separatism is not about independence or sovereignty. It's about US control over our resources. That's what happened. I'm a gross person. The rest of Canada needs to acknowledge and address Western alienation. I don't have all the answers, but maybe we can start by getting some proportional representation so elections aren't decided before the West even finishes voting. Maybe Western provinces should have fair representation on the Supreme Court. Maybe we need to revisit how we select the Senate. Maybe we need to revisit how we divide wealth between the provinces. Maybe we need more democracy, not less. Part of improving democracy means preventing US billionaires and corporations from using their power and money to influence our elections. People are rightly concerned about India and China, but America has been America-ing the shit out of our democracy for far too long, and it has to stop. The good news is that Alberta separatism can still be stopped democratically. So, if you live in Alberta and you want to do your part to help Alberta stay in Canada, there is a counter petition by Forever Canadian. Link in the description to find out where to sign. You have to do it in person though, so pick a date and bring a friend. Bring several friends. Bring 8 friends. Bring every single person you've ever met. That's the video. Thanks for watching. A big shout out to the flock over on Patreon. See these names? That could be you. If you want to support the Goose for a fraction of the cost of a barrel of Western Canadian Select oil, head over to Patreon, link in the description. You can also support the Goose for free by just hitting all the right buttons and sharing the video. Also, if you want to see me do math around Alberta's emissions per capita, you can find that video there as well. And, let me know what you think about all of this. Well, what do you think about the Alberta Prosperity Project's plan? How do we heal Western alienation? Let me know in the only place we have left for rational, thoughtful discussion, the comment section. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.